Hello, everybody. This is Isaac Ashby from Steam Thinkers, and welcome to our live broadcast. We're kind of new to this live broadcast thing, but I'm so excited to start doing them. We'd like to do more as we go along. So today we are going to start with one of the most basic, essential questions or issues that people have with Steam, which is, what is it? What is this thing they call Steam or STEM to many people? Steam or STEM, same thing. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. But first, I would like to start with a story from my childhood. You might want to get out your hankies because you might do a little bit of crying. I know I will. No, I'm just kidding. So I was in high school, and this is a great story. I laugh every time I think about it. I was in high school, and it was Christmas time, and my sister, she was only a couple years younger than me, she opened up this gift, and it was this little tiny cardboard guitar. Now, this little tiny cardboard guitar, she opened it, and she just kind of gave my dad a quizzical look like, what is this? What's going on? And my dad kind of laughs, and he runs out of the room, and he comes back with this ginormous, like a refrigerator box. It was huge. And he had decorated it, made it to look like this futuristic machine. And he called it the dehydration machine. So this dehydration machine, he said, would rehydrate my sister's dehydrated guitar. Pretty silly, right? And so he takes this little guitar, this little cardboard guitar, and he shoves it into this little slot. And then he has my sister come over and turn this little crank. So she turns this little crank, and out pops a full-size guitar, much to our amazement. Now, this sort of thing was not an isolated incident in my home. These sorts of things happened all the time because my dad was just this brilliant electrical engineer who was always tinkering, always fixing, always repurposing stuff around the home. And this is the kind of atmosphere that I grew up in. And as I grow, it's kind of funny because as I grew up in this atmosphere and then started my professional life, I took these skills and these things, this example that my dad had set, and I used them. Like I didn't follow in my dad's footsteps. I did not become an electrical engineer. I became a wildlife biologist, and I spent my time in the field doing research and surveys, actually handling animals. And so I would use my knowledge and the stuff that I had learned as a kid in that field. Well, the life of a wildlife biologist is a difficult life. It's a life where I was working 12, 14-hour shifts, 4 days a week, and it was a tough life. So I decided to give up that life and join the circus. That sounds crazy, right? But by circus, I mean substitute teaching, which in itself is a circus. Because what profession is more difficult than being a substitute teacher? I mean, seriously, you go into a classroom, you don't know anybody, and the kids are bent on making life miserable for you. Well, so I joined substitute teaching, and one thing that I learned is that the sort of thinking that I grew up with, this very hands-on, do-it-yourself, problem-solving sort of mentality, is going by the wayside. And this kind of troubled me, and I found that there is an answer to help kids to become like me. I mean, that sounds really egotistical, but really, In today's age, rather than fix a broken toy, what does a kid do? They just throw it away. They just ask for a new one, or they just want something else. They stop playing with it, and they don't look for answers to questions typically through anything other than Googling it or asking Siri. So this sort of mentality has got to change. And the perfect answer is STEAM or STEM. Now, real quickly, STEAM, STEM, two different acronyms that mean two different things, right? Well, let me get to that in a minute. STEAM teaching, from here on out, I'm just going to refer to it as STEAM, but just know that that's also STEM. It's just STEM with art included, and you'll understand more in a little bit. But let's talk about why we should be using STEAM. And should we be using it? Haha, look at this cool banner. We've got this, we figured out how to add banners to this. Pretty cool, huh? There's technology at its finest. So STEAM, some benefits to STEAM. Let me make sure that I don't miss all of my points. So one thing that I noticed in substitute teaching is that when you would teach something, many times the kids would say, "But that doesn't apply to me. How am I going to ever learn, or how am I ever going to use this in my normal life?" Well, STEAM bridges that gap between the classroom and real life, and it's a project-based approach to teaching, and so they don't ask that question because they know how they can use it, because it's just built into how STEAM is taught. Next, kids are more engaged in activities, right? Generally, when you're teaching and they're reading out of a book, it's really hard for many kids to stay focused on, just plain textbook reading and worksheets. Whereas if they're doing hands-on experiments and projects, they're much more engaged. Also, STEAM focuses on processes rather than knowledge. One of the things that happens in school nowadays, which is sad, is that many times, especially this happens in science, is that you're loaded with facts where you have to go home and you memorize all the periodic elements. It's just brute memorization, memorizing all these different things. Whereas in the real world, it's not as simple as just memorizing facts. There's all sorts of processes like problem solving, engineering, and things like that can get missed in regular teaching if you're not really into it. So it's a great way. So STEAM is a great way to teach processes rather than facts. And finally, it helps prepare kids for future careers. That's why STEM, I'm calling it STEM now because in the 1950s, I think, is about when STEM started. And that's why they started using STEM, is because they were really trying to recruit people into the sciences, the technology, engineering, and math work fields. And so it's a great way to teach those things and to prepare kids for the future. All right, now there's a whole bunch of other benefits, but I'm going to try to not talk your ears off about all of those. You'll see as we start explaining things, how valuable STEAM is and what exactly it is. So let's talk about, we've kind of talked about why STEAM, but now let's talk about what is STEAM. What is it really? Well, it stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, Art, and Math. It's an acronym, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Nothing more than an acronym of 5 different subjects. Well, it sounds easy, but it is easy, really. But the 5 subjects, well, let me say it this way. Traditionally in schools, these 5 subjects are taught in silos, or they're taught by themselves. Like you'll go to math class or you'll go to science class and you just learn math in math class and you just do science in science class. Well, the real world isn't like that. And so STEAM is the answer to that, in that it attempts to integrate those 5 subjects, or at least some of those subjects, into a project or an activity. And that is where the strength of STEAM is. And that's going back to the point of benefits of STEAM. You learn what you can connect it to real life because you're doing these things in an integrated way that's more like real life. Okay. Let's see. And it's basically one more thing I want to mention. What is STEAM? Is so I mentioned it's project based. So the kids are doing projects. They're very hands-on projects. These aren't like math problems, math story problems kind of thing. These are hands-on. Get out the tools, get out the technology, get out whatever you're doing, whatever's the lesson, and then the kids go to work. It's a very open-ended way of learning. And it's a very, like I said, hands-on way of learning. So you can see how, in addition to the thinking skills, which are developed in a huge way through regular STEAM, through good STEAM lessons, but they also learn those those physical skills, how to use screwdrivers, how to use all these different tools and technologies. Okay, so that's a little bit about what STEAM is. A hands-on approach to teaching, project-based, and it focuses on what we call STEAM thinking, which is developing the critical thinking skills and creative thinking skills. Okie dokie artichoke. So now I want to kind of get into a project, because all this sounds all nice and fluffy and happy, and you're like, yay, I want to do this, but what's the next step? Well, I want to tell you a little bit how I approach STEAM projects, and show you. I'm going to take a common project, a common STEAM project that you'll find on Pinterest or the internet, and I'm going to rework it to make it fantastic. Okie dokie. I keep saying okie dokie. I feel like I'm talking to my kids again. So, without further ado, what makes a great STEAM project? Well, number one, it is open-ended. Meaning, what makes a great STEAM project? First, it's open-ended. Now, if you go to Pinterest and you search up STEM or STEAM projects, what you will find is typically a whole bunch of pins where there are instructions on how to build some little thing, like build a catapult or build a bridge or how to build an elevator. All sorts of what I would call tutorials, which how much learning is there? I call those recipes, because they're following instructions. Now, there is some value in following a recipe and learning how to follow instructions, but that's not exactly what you're there to do. You're not there to follow instructions. You are there to develop thinking skills. So it needs to be open-ended. Number two, it involves students asking questions. So what sort of questions would they be asking? Like, if you began a project, like, for example, let's take catapult, right? This is a common project that people make. It's what I call a recipe project, where they're given supplies and they're shown a basic model, and then they just recreate it and they say, yay, we've done STEAM. Well, what sort of questions does this have? I mean, not very many, right? Unless you are really engaged and can help your kids or your students to start asking good questions. So some good questions would be like, how can we improve this design? How can we make traditionally you shoot little cotton balls. I had a cotton ball, but I think my son shot it off into the Netherlands. That's pretty far. Anyway, so man, my train of thought just completely went sideways. But how far can you, oh yeah, student-driven questions. How far can you shoot it? What can you do to make this design even better? All sorts of questions. The students have to be asking questions because that leads to thinking skills. It leads to them developing those thought processes. Okay. And number 3 of what makes a good STEAM project, it contains more than one subject. Now, I've seen lots of STEAM projects that are really more like science projects, where you get on and you do a science experiment and yay, we're done. But did you use technology? Did you use any math? Did you use any language arts or anything other than science? That's the whole power of STEAM, is integrating subjects to mimic real life situations. So it's important that you use more than one subject in a STEAM lesson. Okay, so none of this just math kind of thing. You want to integrate things. So for example, if I was to do this project, and so if we were going to remake this project, well, let's do it. Let's remake this project right now. Okay, so the STEAM catapult, one of the most common STEAM projects out there, and as I said, it's more of a recipe experiment, and I'm going to kind of bring it up to the camera so you can see it a little better. Basically, you're given a few supplies and you are told to build a catapult, and then you are asked to launch a cotton ball, which I've already mentioned before. Well, let's make this into a better lesson. So let's take this and let's start asking questions. What do we want to, so when the kids start building a catapult and they get to this point, what can we have them do to develop those thinking skills? Well, first off, I would start asking questions like, how can we improve this catapult? Now, I took this and I took this really basic design and I started building it to make it a much better catapult. And I ended up with this. I know, real funky, right? Really kind of high tech kind of looking, but anyway, that's cool. But what else can we do? Because right now we're only at one subject, right? Because we've been talking about how do we integrate subjects into STEAM. Well, let's, so how do we integrate more subjects into this? Let's work math into it. So how do we do math? Well, let's take a tape measure. Okay, so what I would recommend with kids doing this is I would have them measure, take out their tape measure, and I would have them measure distances that their pom-poms go, right? So let's say that they launch something, they launch a pom-pom and it goes, you know, let's say 4 feet, 3 inches. So what I'd have them do is once that pom-pom, once they did that once, I'd have them do a series of it and then average that out. See, now they're using math. They're combining the engineering of a catapult and they're using some math. Well, what else can we do? Well, now that they've got it to where they've used a little math, let's use, let's have them redesign it. So how can you improve it by, I like to give them a percent. Let's improve it by 20%. So now they've got to redesign their catapult to where it will launch 20% further than what it was before. So now they're working other math principles into it. And you could even work into it a graph. I love using graph paper with my STEAM projects. I use them for so many of them because it's a great way for kids to integrate real note-taking and math skills. So I would have them grab a piece of note paper or a piece of graph paper and start graphing it as they redesign it. And then at the very end, what I would do is I would have them take and do what I call the debrief. So the debrief is the wrap up of the lesson where the kids will, well, there's, let me make sure that I get all this. There's 3 things that I like kids to get out of a good lesson. Number 1 is I want the debrief, sorry, the very end of the lesson when we're talking about this, I want them to write down what went well. First off, always start with what went well. And number two, what didn't go well or what didn't work. And then number three is I try to help them to understand what failing is and what failing isn't. This is a whole topic that I'm going to do a whole live broadcast on someday. But failing is one thing that I've noticed among kids that's a big problem, because we're so used to sports and failing being the ultimate outcome rather than a step in the process. And so in the wrap up of a good STEAM lesson, I always try to work into it the concept of failing. So that's why we talk about what didn't work. And then I follow up what didn't work with, okay, well, what can we do better? What should we do? And then we'll move on to another prototype and continually make it better and better and better. Okay, you see what I'm doing there? Because you always want them to think of failure as nothing more than a step somewhere in the middle, and that they're always working to make it better and better and better. So that's kind of how I would rework this. Okay, is I would have them rebuild it, graph it, make it 20% better, and then improve it. Let's see. Let me make sure that I've got everything. One more thing that I failed to mention that I want to go back is every STEAM lesson that I do has 3 parts of it. 3 parts in every STEAM activity or lesson that I do. Number 1 is it always has a lesson at the beginning. And by lesson, I mean I talk to them and I explain the challenge or the project. And like if I'm talking about building a catapult, then we're going to talk a little bit of physics. I try to make it really short, like 10 minutes. If we're doing an hour activity, only 10 minutes of it I'm going to do with a catapult. And so that's what I do with a catapult. Or with all lessons, is I'm going to do some sort of explanation, because you don't want to just toss them in the deep end and say, okay, build something. This is the mistake that so many people make. Don't make them learn everything the hard way. Now, let me back up for a second, because there is some value in having people learn the hard way, as long as in the wrap up you go through and then you talk about these engineering principles that they learned throughout their designing and building. Okay, but generally I like to start at the beginning and say 10 minutes, here we go, we're going to be building catapults. Now let's talk about simple machines and leverage real quickly so that they know what they're working with. Okay, so every lesson has 1, a lesson at the beginning, 2, a project in the middle, that's the hands-on thing that they're working on, and then number 3, the wrap-up. Okay, that was one thing that we kind of jumped into that I skipped over real quickly, and just because I didn't make a banner for it. Silly me. Okay, so I am going to, if you guys have any questions, feel free to type them into the comments. As I think about different projects, there are lots of projects on Pinterest that you need to be wary about what you're using as STEAM and not as STEAM. So I hope that this broadcast has helped you to understand a little bit more about what is STEAM and what it's not, and that you can use this to make better STEAM lessons. So a quick recap, if you're just joining us, STEAM teaching, science, technology, engineering, art, and math. It's a way to integrate subjects into a project that mimics real-life situations. STEAM focuses on real-world problems. It's hands-on, and kids learn life skills. And finally, one more time, a good STEAM lesson or a good STEAM activity starts with a quick 10-minute or short lesson that's related to the project they're doing. Then they go into the hand-on build or project design. And then you finish with a wrap-up where they talk about what went right, what went wrong, and how they can improve their broadcast, or how they can improve their project, or whatever it is they built. So there's the quick sum up. This is Isaac Ashby from Steam Thinkers. Thanks for watching. We'll see you later.